Starting record. All right.
We have. So thanks everybody and welcome to our call today with Dr. Akhil Shahani. And Akhil's somebody, I call him a brother from another mother. We've known each other, I think 16 years, maybe even longer this year. And also Akhil is a shareholder in one of our companies, Worldwide Business Intelligence, and a partner in a number of things we do. The Shahani family name is synonymous with education in India. So if you're Indian and you don't know the Shahanis, then you're probably not Indian. That's what I always tell people. And this year, I'm very pleased to say Akhil won Educator of the Year in India. And in a country of over 1 billion people, 1.4, I think, that's no mean feat. So very heartfelt congratulations for that, Akhil. And he's going to share some aspects of leadership from his perspective this morning. So all over to you, Akhil.
Thanks a lot, Mike. And I just want to make a slight correction. We're actually brothers from the same mother because my mother's adopted Mike as one of her sons. So I won't say different fathers, but we are quite close. I mean, and we've known and loved each other. And he's been sort of a friend, philosopher, guide for me for a very long time as well. So, but it's great to see so many enthusiastic faces here, and whichever part of the world you are in. And also, I've also noticed that it seems a lot of you guys may be already very experienced entrepreneurs. So some of the stuff I'm going to talk about leadership may be a little obvious, but I hope you guys all get value out of it, and we can have a fun conversation for the next 1 hour or so. Right? I'm going to start by sharing my screen, and hopefully technology will not let me down. Mike, is that visible?
Perfect.
Okay, great. How to be a great leader? Obviously, we know the only other great leader we know of is King Jong-il, who actually was not really that a great leader. But how can we be fantastic leaders in our own businesses or our own environment? So let's start with destroying a couple of myths. When you look at leadership, and I'm hoping this, there we go. Most of the time, when you think, okay, fine, who are the entrepreneurs you want to be like? You all say, hey, I want to be like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, and these are the people that I admire and I want to be more and more like. But are they really that admirable? Let's talk a bit about them, the inside story behind the media hype and the autobiographies or the biographies. So we all know that Steve Jobs himself was actually really, really autocratic. He was really the sort of person he would walk into his engineer, like let's say there was a engineer was working on a project for the last 3 years. Steve Jobs said, this is the worst piece of crap I've seen, and cancel the project without listening. He used to fire people. Talent used to just leave the company. A lot of people don't know this. Actually, Steve Jobs tried to shut down the iPhone project before it started. In fact, a lot of the engineers actually created a team and actually created with the iPhone in spite of Steve Jobs. So the iPhone did not come out because of Steve Jobs. It came out in spite of Steve Jobs. So that's one thing. Elon Musk, of course, is everyone's favorite. He is known to post tweets on his account, and the share price of Tesla just goes up and down based on any casual conversation. Again, he's, I think, had 3 or 4 wives. He's had top management leave him. Of course, he smoked a doobie on radio. And again, very, very erratic. Jeff Bezos, on the other hand, in fact, looks a bit like Dr. Evil from the Austin Powers movies, if you look at that. And slightly, although Mike looks a bit like him, but he looks cuter, of course. But Jeff Bezos himself, basically, as we know, we've seen stories about Amazon, the horrible work conditions of Amazon, and how people have actually suffered in terms of not being allowed to go and take a toilet break and actually go and pee in jugs just to sort of keep on supporting their work environment. So Jeff Bezos actually is a very horrible, in all these cases, all these key leaders have actually created extremely toxic work environments inside their own organizations. But then you ask me the question, but Akhil, these guys are billionaires. How do they succeed in spite of being toxic leaders? You notice all of these people succeed very well in an environment which is basically the technology industry in Silicon Valley, where you have a lot of a lot of investors just give you piles of money just to, as long as you can promote a great product. So in spite of that very toxic environment and the toxic way of running their businesses, they work very well in the tech industry in Silicon Valley. Try being a toxic leader in any other country in the world, in South Africa, in Australia, India, any other part, with any other group of people, especially knowledge workers, you will have people leaving your company in droves. So don't assume that being a toxic leader or being that Jeff Bezos or Steve Jobs is a great way to run your business. So seriously, read their autobiographies and biographies for entertainment, but don't necessarily follow them as a leader. So let's talk about what are the leadership styles that exist. There are many of them out there. So let's talk about the first one, autocratic, which is actually the most common one that we see, especially when you look at traditional businesses in Asia, where you have a family patriarch, where it's really more, again, my way or the highway. I will make decisions as the leader. I will not talk to my team. I just expect my team to follow orders. Now, Napoleon, classic example. But again, understand one thing. It's not that being an autocratic leader is bad generally. It works very, very well in certain environments, especially if you are a military leader, you need to make sure that you're autocratic. You may not have time to actually decide to get consensus when you're defining a military objective and you want to get work done, when especially there's a lot of, let's say, enemies surrounding you. Definitely when your company is going down the tubes and you need to do a quick turnaround, sometimes you have these turnaround experts who come into a company and sort of revamp the company. They don't have time to actually get consensus or work done. They just get things done very quickly. Again, it's a my way or the highway process. Another thing again is that if you're running, let's say, a McDonald's franchise, where every aspect of the franchise is mandated in terms of saying that how long the fries have to be cooked for, at what temperature, every burger has to be made exactly the same. You don't have the ability, or let's say the reason to actually tell your frontline workers, okay, think independently. Maybe you can create the burger in a different way. You can come up with your own creativity. You can't. You have to come up with a straightforward process that is repeatable and movable. So being autocratic as a McDonald's franchise owner sometimes will work better because you have no leeway to let people think around you. You have to just make them follow orders. So that's one leadership style. Let's talk about some more. All right, bureaucratic. This is, I think, unfortunately, most of us have dealt with government officials who are just bureaucratic. They will just follow things by the rules. They are just, they will not follow what people want. They will just say, okay, this is what the rule says. We will follow the rules, no questions asked, and we will just continue the same thing going. Now, I know that most of us have dealt with government officials, but even when you look at, let's say, large bureaucratic organizations, when you're looking at government-owned organizations or even privately run traditional organizations, sometimes being a bureaucratic manager helps, because it may not help in terms of helping other people, but following the rules and just keeping a head low and working sometimes helps people move up the seniority ladder, because they follow the rules of the company. They just make sure that all the boxes are ticked, and that's it. And so sometimes being bureaucratic is not fun, but it works in certain organizations. Transactional. This is our Jack Welch classic example. Like, okay, as we all know, in GE, he had that model that said that every year they will analyze the bottom 5% performers in the organization and fire them. No questions asked. They do not make a lot of effort to train them or do anything. They just say, like, if you either you perform or you're out. So a lot of American business, especially when you're looking at a lot of management theory, like Frederick Taylor and all spoke about management theory, where they focus on, let's say, shareholder value, not stakeholder value. They say the focus of the business is profits for the business owners, right? That means that we will be very transactional. We don't care what happens to the employees. It's more like, okay, focus, perform or die. So again, this unfortunately is actually getting more and more prevalent in the world as the focus on shareholder value becomes more important. So people say, I want to be like Jack Welch. I want to be like, what was the term? I think Neutron Jack, where I will just come in, I will fire people if they don't perform. But again, it does not develop people in the organization. There's a very low trust environment, because if you do not show any loyalty to your team will not show loyalty back to you. So again, it works a lot in investment banks. You look at, let's say, a bank like Goldman Sachs or other places where, again, you are basically known and your bonuses are based on how well you performed in the last quarter. They don't care who you are or what you want to do, what your potential is. You perform and you get rewarded. You don't perform, you're out. That's it. Transaction, no questions asked. All right. This is, some of you may recognize this lady. She is Sarah Blakely. She is the founder of Spanx. And in fact, I had watched a great interview about her recently. She's one of the youngest, or maybe the youngest female self-made billionaire. And some of you may know Spanx. Spanx basically was underwear, or let's say underclothing, which actually helps shape you and make you look better. So people like myself, who need a little help looking thinner than we are, would actually wear, let's say, a Spanx vest, which would actually compress the love handles that we have. So she came up with this idea when she was 22. And again, it just took off and she's done very well. What is interesting is that when she said in the interview is that, look, as a young person who's 22, 23, I just had a great product idea. I had no idea how to run a business, how to manage people, how to, let's say, grow a company. So she said the smartest thing I did was actually hire senior managers or people under me who actually knew what they were doing. And I just let all the decisions be made by them, which works very well in maybe her environment where she said, okay, look, I will let the company be run by my team and I will just sort of focus on product development. It is great, and it works very well if you are a very young startup founder or let's say much younger than your team member. However, what will happen is that until you actually take more control of your own organization, your company itself may start getting disorganized, and which is what happened with Sarah as well, because she started by depending a lot on her managers, but at some point she started taking more control after a few years and said, okay, let me focus on the growth of my organization, because in the early years, every manager had their own ideas as to how the business would grow, and it got a little more disorganized. So laissez-faire works very well at the early stages, but it's not a great long-term strategy to have as a leader, right? Democratic. Now, this guy, some of you guys may know or not. His name is Jamie Dimon. He is the CEO, the long-serving CEO of JP Morgan. What is interesting is that if you compare the CEOs of all the large investment banks in the US, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Merrill Lynch, and the other ones, he's the only one who still survives. Every other bank went downhill, lost a lot of money, and they kicked out their CEO. He survived because he actually had a very interesting way of running his organization. In fact, he's one of the most respected investment bankers out there for a couple of generations. Mainly because what he did, he said, look, I'm actually, like when the whole financial crisis happened, before the financial crisis happened, a lot of investment banks were just going crazy investing on, as you all know, the CDOs and the credit default swaps. I'm not going to get into what they were. But the thing is that they were just going after getting the maximum amount of profit. What Jamie Dimon did was that he spoke to a lot of his managers, he spoke to a lot of his team members, and they said, look, should we go down the path of just buying more and more credit default swap to make sure that we get good fees and good returns? His manager said, look, the problem is that what goes up will come down. So don't go crazy buying all these credit default swaps that these other guys are doing. So in the years preceding 2008, a lot of other banks made a lot more money than JP Morgan, and JP Morgan didn't earn as much. But when the market collapsed, JP Morgan was one of the few banks which were standing in good stead and had a good balance sheet. So Jamie Dimon, in fact, is actually a big believer in developing his people. He also gets a lot of, he has a great team around him, and he's got people working with him for the last, I think, 10, 15 years who've been with the company, and that's very rare in the financial world, because where people just keep on jumping to higher and higher salaries. Mainly because he makes sure that he gets the best team members around him and he actually listens to what they have to say. Of course, the downside of that is that if you have decisions based on a democratic approach, or let's say a more growth by consensus, it actually could slow down the decision-making process. If you go to see, let's say you take a Goldman Sachs, which actually bought a lot of CDOs and then managed to cash out, made more money than JP Morgan, because JP Morgan also ran a little slower. So in some cases, you want to work quicker and go back to the autocratic leader point of view when you say, look, I want to get things done very quickly. I don't have time to think or be democratic. That works well as an autocratic leader. But if you're democratic, you have to assume that because you're taking more and more people's opinions, you can actually run the business in a much slower process. You actually will not be able to maybe grow as quickly. Again, every leadership style works in different environments, right? All right. This guy, some of you guys, maybe many of you don't know him. This fellow is called Ratan Tata. He runs the Tata Group, which is India's largest conglomerate, the group. Tata Group basically has got a holding company called Tata Sons, which Ratan Tata heads. He's the chairman of Tata Sons. And under that, they've got subsidiary companies. They run Tata Consulting Services, which is the largest IT company in India. They've got Tata Motors, which makes automobiles. They've got Tata Chemicals, they've got Tata Steel, a whole range of, they run hotels, the Taj hotels. They actually run around almost 27 different companies under the Tata Sons holding company. Now, obviously, Ratan Tata will not have the ability, or let's say the need, to actually go down and understand the operations of each company. His purpose is to focus on the overall growth strategy of the organization, and he has to trust people below him to make sure that they grow the organization. Again, Ratan Tata does not focus on quarterly numbers or date or annual goals. He's more saying, okay, this is where the Tata Group is going to go. We want to develop into, let's say, a more technology-focused company, but that is over the next 3 to 5 years. Then he will give the general strategy to his various CEOs of the various companies, and they will then start moving in that direction. Again, it works very well if you're running a very large conglomerate or you have a lot of flunkies under you in different areas. But unfortunately, again, it goes back to the idea of democratic consensus times 10, because you are focusing more on strategy and you still have to wait for a lot of feedback from your juniors as to how things are moving. So you will see a lot of inefficiencies and bottlenecks. And in fact, it's happened with the Tata Group, where a lot of the new innovations, a lot of the new opportunities which have happened in India have not been taken by the Tata Group. They've got billions of dollars available. However, because of this more strategic approach and the large scale that we have, they're not able to go after the individual opportunities that other companies have been able to take. So good, it does have its downsides. Of course, all that being said, it's always great to be the head of a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate and just focus on the easy strategic stuff. But most of us have to roll up our sleeves and get the work done. All right, let's next one. All right, there we go. This, of course, my favorite type of leadership, and I think if a lot of you are in the training and coaching industry, this is something that you guys look at. So, of course, I think I don't have to introduce this gentleman, but let's talk about Mahatma Gandhi, how he worked. So, as you know, he actually was leading the independence movement of India before 1947. However, don't forget is that when he was leading the movement, he did not have employees, he didn't have flunkies, he was not paying anyone's salary. He had to get a team of different leaders who all had their own needs and their own motivation to get together to a common goal, which is try to get the British to quit India. So to do that, he said, look, I'm not going to be a leader in the traditional sense. I'm not going to give orders. I'm not going to sort of say, this is your target, now go about, do it. What he did is said, look, I'm actually going to coach all of you leaders to become better leaders. And of course, to try to have a combined vision to sort of get the British to get out together. So the idea basically is that he said, look, I will focus on developing my own leaders and the cause will take care of itself. If you look at, let's say, a lot of professional firms, like let's say a McKinsey or let's say Accenture, other large firms like that, you have a range of partners, a lot of, let's say, senior directors, but there's no, maybe one person who's, let's say, the head of the organization. But again, they have a limited term. They may be the managing director or the managing partner for, let's say, a few years, and then another person takes over. But the point is that they say, look, we will focus on coaching and developing our own leaders or the people below us, such that the overall strategy of the firm is kept sacrosanct. But of course, what happens is that since every leader is being developed in the organization based on their own strengths and weaknesses and what they need to do, sometimes it's very difficult to keep discipline because there's no one strategy that they all may follow. They all may have different strategies in their own mind, and that actually causes a little bit of disconnect or lack of coordination in the organization. And which you see, a lot of these large legal firms or large consulting firms tend to move very slowly to adapt to new changes. In fact, if you want to get, let's say, consulting done, or let's say support in a new technology or a new area, you probably don't want to go to McKinsey or some of these older firms because they work in a certain way and very difficult to, like we say, getting a large tanker which is moving in a certain direction to change direction. It takes a lot of time for that tanker to change direction. But coaching is actually a great leadership strategy, and it works very well if you have a lot of very, very smart people around you, and you just want to get a group of people to work together as a group without that much, let's say, authority in your hands. Okay, so let's, the next one. Transformational. That is, this guy is Sam Walton. He transformed Walmart from a single outlet in Benton, Arkansas, into the largest offline retail company before Amazon came along and sort of spoiled that. But what is interesting is that he actually focused on transforming employees. It's not just saying, I'm going to change my people or going to transform them for just for their own benefit, just like, let's say, what coaching was. Coaching was focusing on transforming and supporting their the team members based on their own strengths and weaknesses. what Sam also did, or what a transformational leader does, said, look, there's a direct goal that we all have to go to. I will try to develop you guys to better serve the needs of the goal, not develop you for the sake of developing you, but if you are able to develop yourselves to support the goal better, and I do that by keep on giving you more and more difficult projects to deal with, or more and more challenging goals to work with, I will transform you into better leaders. But the whole point again is that I'm transforming you for the service of the company, not to make you a better person or a better leader like you would see in the coaching organization. Agreed. So this works very well in a lot of companies. In fact, a lot of people are now, when they're looking at stakeholder capitalism, when they're saying, look, I don't want to be transactional, where people live and die based on their targets, but we actually want to develop our people to be a little more loyal. Transformational leadership is actually getting more and more popular. It's a good leadership model to have, especially when you have a growing company. However, don't forget is that you will always have people dropping out. Their individual needs may be lost in the overall growth. But again, there's a trade-off, and you can't say that one type of leadership is better than the other, or let's say I have to focus totally on my people's needs or not on my people's needs. Everything is a spectrum. It's not either or. It's not black and white like most things in the world. Okay? So, what sort of leader should you be? Well, I think there's no right answer. I can't say that you should always be a coaching leader. You should always be, let's say, autocratic or should be transactional. The point really is that what environment are you in? You need to, so there's actually a concept called situation leadership, right? Situation leadership means that you as a leader need to understand what environment are you working in? What's your situation? Are you running a factory where you have a whole bunch of these factory workers, or a franchisee like McDonald's, where you don't want them to think independently, you just want them to follow the orders and follow the process, because your success is based on how repeatable your process is, and you don't want independent thinking. That works very well in a certain environment. Conversely, if you have a whole bunch of people in your organization which are very brilliant and they have their own ideas, in fact, you may actually learn from them versus them learning from you, then being, let's say, a more a coaching-based leader or democratic leader makes sense. So when you look at situation leadership, which is what I'm talking about, you need to understand the situation that you're in, and then what's the best leadership style to apply there. Now, of course, it makes sense for all of you to start developing certain leadership styles yourself. You can't be, okay, I'm only going to be a transactional leader, numbers driven. I'm only going to be a coaching based leader. If you are able to look at some transactional aspects and looking at some coaching aspects and maybe look at some autocratic aspects, autocratic is not necessarily bad. You will actually then be able to apply one of the tools in your toolbox to the situation that you're in. And don't forget, you are not only a leader in your own organization. You may be a leader in, let's say, community. You may be a leader, let's say, in your family. You may be a leader in any other organization that you're part of. So you will have different environments, different situations where you have to apply leadership. In fact, I've not succeeded in being an autocratic leader with my family. I think that tends to be a very bad thing to do. So the idea is that be aware of the situation that you're in and apply the right leadership style that is useful in your toolbox. Okay, so how do you develop your own leadership skills? Now, I know that a lot of us as entrepreneurs say, hey, we are fully focused on I'm fully focused on my own business or growing, I'm surviving. And of course, I have to take time from family. How do I look at time and developing my leadership skills? What I strongly suggest is that the more leadership environments that you're thrown into, the more different environments that you're thrown in, the more you can develop your leadership skills. So therefore you say that, look, why don't I look at, let's say, joining a Rotary Club, or let's say, Kiwanis, or let's say volunteering in my school, or volunteering to coach the football team. The idea again is that the best thing about joining these organizations like a Rotary or coaching a football team or your school is that these people are not flunkies. They're not going to listen to you because of your authority. You need to convince them, you need to charm them, you need to get them excited to actually follow what you suggest. And also don't forget, you also need to get the discipline to actually become a great follower. Sometimes the best leaders are also great followers. Sometimes it's good to actually follow other people and learn from them as well. So again, the more projects you get involved in outside your core business, you will actually get a lot more chance to develop more leadership. And some of these other things are quite obvious, like discipline. And of course, I don't have to tell you that getting involved in projects is a lot more useful than just watching more Netflix or just sort of wasting time. However, another thing you should look at, and this is something that I suggest to a lot of people, is that start looking at what's called a low information diet. That means that a lot of us always want to be up to date with the news. We watch TV news. We track Twitter, what's going on. We track on LinkedIn, other things. We keep on looking at different sources of information and say, okay, fine, we know more about the world. The problem is that when you think, let's say, okay, look back 2 weeks before this, right? And what news item was really so important to your life today? So the idea again with discipline is to figure out that where do you allocate your time? Do you allocate your time looking at low levels of information sources, wasting time on Netflix, or let's say wasting time with others? Or do you have the discipline to keep on improving yourself? Now, that again, that's another talk that you can sort of, that is outside the scope of this conversation. However, the point being that the more discipline you have, the more projects you do, and the more you're aware of the situation around you and the environment that you're in, you actually will develop your leadership skills. It's not something that you develop overnight. This will be ongoing. I mean, like even when you're 70, 75, 80, you will still be developing as a leader. It's a journey to go through. So bottom line, I think the question really is leadership is a mindset. There's no right answer or wrong answer, but the best thing to do is be aware of the different styles of leadership, be aware of the situation that you're in, and keep on developing yourself to keep on learning more leadership styles and taking these various tools and using them as needed. So I think Mike, I think we've hit 42 minutes. So at this point, hopefully, if I was interesting enough, we can run some Q&A.
Yeah, we'll do that, Akhil. Thank you so much. And I think we've been having a great chat in the chat while you've been talking as well about what sort of leader are you. So let me pick up the chat and I'll throw that at you as a question, Akhil.
Sure.
So, I go right back to sort of, going right back here. Paul Taval says he's a democratic leader. I said, yeah, me too. Then Moira said that she's more of a beginner, transitional, relational, intuitive type of leader. I've said Lundy's actually a strategic leader based on your things. So Brenda's then sort of got a democratic with a blend of coaching. Then Bruce says the wisdom of situational leadership and the when is to be what is the key to it. And then I said, yeah, but if you change a lot, then you become dysfunctional. You come across as dysfunctional. Nobody actually knows which version of you is going to turn up today. And then, then Moira's finished up here by saying she thinks attunement is the key. So tuning into this. So maybe Akhil, what do you think for the entrepreneurs that are on this call is a nice blend of leadership in an SME, and somebody with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up to 10 staff?
Okay. Well, I would say that, again, it depends on the SME, right? Now, for example, like let's say if you are running a consulting firm with, let's say, up to 10 people who are all brilliant in their own way and they all have their own ideas, and obviously being democratic or being a coach would work well. But conversely, if you are running, let's say, a technology company where you have to get your programmers to just keep on coding all the time, and they may or may not have a great personality and they just want to sit down quietly and get the work done, maybe you might focus on being a more autocratic leader, because at that case, you are then responsible for making sure that you deliver your projects on time and under budget. Again, the point really is to understand your own situation, number one. Number two, think in your mind that, okay, I've got my team of 5 to 10 people. How would I want them to act? So for example, if I want to have my team and say, look, I just want them to basically listen to me all the time and just make sure projects are done without any question, then the leadership style will be more autocratic. Conversely, you say, look, I want to actually keep on developing the knowledge workers that I have in my organization. I want them to start coming up with their own ideas. I want them to start independently thinking and maybe coming up with better suggestions as to how our company can grow. Then maybe a coaching democratic process might work better. If you're running, let's say, a financial firm, as I mentioned earlier, and you say, look, at the end, it's like either earn or die. I mean, again, transaction leadership works. So again, the point I'm trying to make is that you need to first get a sense in your own organization, what are the parameters to success? Number one. Number two, in your mind as a leader, what would you need your team members to do to help you achieve that, right? Because don't forget, I'm assuming that most of you run your own companies. So therefore, you are very clear as to what are the things that your team members need to do to make sure that you're able to hit the targets or the growth that you want. Once you're aware of the dynamics of what your growth targets are and what your team members need to do to help you grow that, then you say, okay, what's the most appropriate leadership style from the toolbox that I see that will enable me to get these my team members to help us achieve the target. The second thing very important is that you might say, hey, yes, I want to develop my coaching style, but you don't necessarily have that confidence that you are a great coach. That's why I said you need to develop your leadership skills. Start talking to other people who may have a great coaching style. There are people around you. There are mentors. There are people who are friends who may be great coaches that you say, yeah, maybe I'd like to sit with my friend, have a beer, have a coffee, and understand how do they coach. And maybe I can learn some points from there. Maybe I can read some books. I mean, of course, Octopus is a great environment to get a lot of information out of. The point being is that understand what leadership style you need to apply to the situation that you're in. If you think that you're great at being that leader, fantastic. If not, develop that leadership style by talking to people, reading things, getting information sources. So again, no one right answer.
No, definitely not. I've got a few questions lined up in my kit for you, and then I'll throw over to anybody else who wants to ask a question. This question is really for people who are meeting you for the first time. Tell us a little bit about your current businesses and what you're sort of running and what you do, which will give us an understanding of what you're leading at the moment.
Okay, sure. So I run the Shahani Group. So basically, I run a chain of colleges in India. I also have an education technology platform where we run a range of mobile apps to teach kids, higher education kids. We also have a placement firm where we give these kids jobs. The overall strategy of what we're doing essentially is that, so my doctorate is in employability, what makes people employable, right? So what I did, I took that defined vision as to what makes someone employable. And a lot of what makes people employable is developing their softer skills, like in terms of their communication skills, their team working, their proactiveness, professionalism, critical thinking, things like that, especially for entry-level employee. And what we've said is that let's apply that model to to a platform that allows us to train kids, assess them, place them in a chain. So the colleges allow us to develop these kids' employability through offline courses. So we have a range of degree and diploma courses, right from MBAs to short 3-month certificate courses. Those are the offline classes. Online, we also offer the same thing through our mobile apps, again, across India. And of course, we're now moving to other parts of Asia. And of course, the placement firm in our mind is really we take these kids and place them in companies. Now, what is interesting is that we look at the client as not the student. We look at the client being the recruiter. Because if the recruiter hires more students, then we know for a fact that we've done a great job with the students with us. So we tell the students, look, you're not the client, you are the product. I mean, I sound a little maybe transactional, but what we say is that, look, if we're able to give the best product to the recruiter is more likely to give you a good job with a high salary. So therefore, you need to develop yourself as per what the recruiter needs. So what we said basically is that even though we have these three entities, the offline colleges, the online education firm, and the placement firm, all of these are there to serve the engine of making kids employable and placing them in jobs. So that's
fantastic. And you really do a great job at all of that. So that's led me to another question. Is there a particular leadership style that works with millennials? Because a lot of people on this call will be having millennials as contractors. I see Bruce has cracked a smile at that one, right? But, millennials do work a little differently than most of the older folk on this call. So is there a particular style that works best with them?
All right, so this is like you actually hit so like a raw nerve with me. I'm actually not a big fan of the term millennials, right? And let me talk about why. Most of us, I think, are from Gen X. Remember, right? I'm Gen X, like in terms of, let's say, people who were born after 1965 and up till, let's say, I think up to 1980 or something like that. So if you remember the 1990s, the good old days, there's a lot of media talking about the Gen Xers, they're slackers, they're all like, they wear grunge. If you remember that movie, Reality Bites, that was supposed to be the Gen X movie, right? We were supposed to be slackers, we didn't care about life, we were, just lost and we were like all high on something or the other. But the funny thing, I don't think most of us were that. But if we were, we grew up very quickly. So again, and don't forget is that when you talk about Gen X, the person growing up in 1980s New York is very different from the kid growing up in 1980s South Africa. Very different from the kid growing up in 1980s India, right? And we all have different needs and things, right? So let's stop taking people under the age of 30 as the same. So basically what you have is that you have younger people. So the assumption is, hey, we need to have a nice environment. We have to give them a need to, you have to give them a reason for working. You have to give them bigger picture stuff. You have to give them like a little more motivation. When we were young, even our time, we were more idealistic. As we got older, we got married, we had a mortgage, we had a kid, we all started getting more and more focused on maybe our careers, right? So I would say for millennials, or let's say if you're working with younger people, yes, two things. One, of course, they tend to be more digital savvy than most of us. So that I think is something that would get them more engaged. And in fact, as leaders, we should actually maybe look at, let's say, learning from them. Because I think this is the first generation where you actually have younger people who know something that we don't. Before it was always the older people knew more than us, right? So that's one thing. Secondly, I think if you let them run with that digital technology and also give them, let's say, a larger picture as to what you're doing. Okay, interesting. So I was actually consulting Siemens, right? And the Siemens head of HR, global head of HR came to me and said, look, we're having a problem attracting younger people into our organization because most of us look at us as very boring and sad. So what I said is that, look, ask yourself, what does Siemens do? Let's say, oh, what Siemens, we make medical equipment, we provide, let's say, this sort of electronics or thing like that. I said, look, the problem is that sounds boring. Instead of saying you provide medical equipment, why can't you say, okay, we create the products that save people's lives? So when you tell a younger person, look, you are not selling medical tools, you are actually helping to save thousands of lives. Very different purpose, right? Now, again, it's not even something for millennials. It's something that any employee would benefit from. I mean, for us, we're in education, so it's frankly easy to sort of motivate our people because we tell them, hey, you are changing the lives of hundreds of thousands of kids. In fact, what we do is that we have our own call center where a lot of the callers are just calling and admitting kids for our courses. We always make sure our call center team gets to meet these kids while they're studying, after they've graduated, after they've got their jobs, because the call center person feels that, hey, I'm not just making 100 calls a day, I'm also changing the person's life. And they feel so fantastically happy when they're the kid who's actually got a fantastic job and they tell the call center, thanks to you guys, I got here. So yeah, so I think not, so when I talk about millennials, back to the point, is that maybe a lot of things that will motivate, let's say, even people above the age of 35 or 40 would also work with younger kids. Just maybe more tech focused, that's it. But don't treat everyone the same. All millennials are not the same.
It's a great answer, Akhil. And I think, if I take some words out of that, you're talking about transformational leadership. Yeah. So, that's what you're really selling to people. And I loved everything that you said. So thanks for saying that. I've got one more question, then I'll hand over to other people. Where do you see leaders going wrong currently in the current world in which we live in? Where are leaders going wrong?
Okay, well, that requires another 1 hour session. But again, I think the short answer really is
not politicians, us as leaders.
So I think, again, it's back to the original point that I think is very often applying the wrong type of leadership to the wrong sort of situation, right? So the thing is that a lot of autocratic leaders probably did very, very well in maybe 20, 30 years ago when, when the companies were more bureaucratic and the environment facilitated more autocratic leaders and less focused on developing people. Now, that issue worked very well then, but it doesn't work very well now, especially in a lot of environments. So the idea, again, is that if a leader is not able to scan the local environment and understand what they're trying to do, they may actually apply the wrong type of leadership and actually mess up. And again, I don't think that people are wrong for long or right for long, right? So for example, there are a lot of cases where companies do very well under certain leadership style and the environment changes, let's say the market changes, a new type of technology comes in and the same leadership style doesn't work anymore. So classic example, if you remember, okay, everyone's favorite, Bill Gates, right? So Bill Gates in the 1980s, I mean, Microsoft was the king or queen of their environment, right? I mean, they actually controlled the Windows desktop operating system. They did very well with Microsoft Office, making billions and billions. However, when mobile phones came up, or where the technology changed, the style of leadership of Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer did not work anymore. And luckily, they were smart enough to retire at the right time. And Satya Nadella came in. Now, Satya Nadella has taken one of the old classic technology companies and flipped it around. Satya Nadella said, look, we are now a cloud-based platform that supports businesses, right? Yes, we have a legacy Windows business for our Microsoft Office business, but our focus is going to be on Microsoft Azure, buying out LinkedIn and things like that. Satya Nadella and Bill Gates have very different leadership styles. So again, it's not that Bill Gates was a better or worse leader than Satya Nadella, but the point is that the environment changed, so therefore the leadership style had to change, right? So again, so that's really the key thing, is that understand the environment, adapt to the leadership
Great.
style.
Okay, great. Thanks. So let's get into questions. Moira has said here, and I'll summarize it for you because it's in the chat. Getting the right people in the right roles and communicating with clarity is a great way to lead. And I think one of the things I see is, and one of the things I've taken out of this call, Akhil, is you're very intentional in the way in which you strategize your leadership, whereas most of us just lead. So at the moment we're working with our sales team doing this, then we're on with our other staff doing that, then we're at home with our family doing this, and we think all of those things basically, as you said before and you joked, autocratic leadership doesn't work too well with your family. Well, some kids grew up with autocratic leadership, but I think intentionalizing it is very, very smart. Okay, so any questions by anybody? If we open this up, you can feel free to type them or unmute your microphone. So I've got
nothing's on bounds, and I'm happy to even give specific answers to a specific situation that you're facing. So maybe in your own organization, if you say, look, I've got this leadership problem happening, so what do you suggest? So yeah, happy to answer anything. Thank you.
Great. That's very, very good, Akhil. We'll see if anybody's got any questions or if people are just absorbing. Every school should, Garth says, every school should have a course that focuses on leadership styles. How true. And it's interesting because I know you do in your schools focus on leadership styles and leadership combinations, as does the school in Malaysia that we work closely with Anne as well. But so I think that's a great point. And an interesting question for everybody, just to sort of bring this to a close, in case anybody's got any final questions, is now are you more intentionalizing your own leadership style now because of this call, or are you basically still sort of winging it? Because maybe winging it has got you stuck in a couple of situations. Bruce, I see your hand up, so please ask your question.
Well, I think one of the big areas that I see in myself and many others is that because we are leaders, we have the expectation that we should have all the answers. And I think one of my big kind of switches that I've seen over the last kind of few years is that a true leader is the person who asks the right questions, not necessarily having the right answers. And so it's a lot more, and I'm just wondering if there's a leadership style, maybe it's an umbrella thing called questionable leadership, but it's not questionable leadership. It's asking the right questions of the right people that makes you a great leader.
So, interesting strategy, right? There are two ways of defining questioning, right? Socratic questioning. So actually I use this to some extent. So it's more of a strategy. So let me talk about, one is you ask your team questions in such a way that the answers that you get tend to lean towards the strategy that you want to implement. So it's really more a way of asking the question so that they realize answers that you want them to realize themselves, and they follow your strategy, right? So that is more a strategic, that's more of a tactical approach. There's another type of questioning, which is more like open-ended questioning, where you want them to brainstorm and come up with answers that you may not have thought of or may not actually consider. So again, it's a matter of saying is that when you use questioning, what's your purpose? Is it that you want to come up with new ideas and then you are more as a follower or just listening to new directions and you may follow what they suggest, which may not be what your thought is? Or are you using questioning for the idea of saying that, look, I want them to realize that my strategy is the best, and I just want them to come up with the answers themselves so that they feel good about following my strategy. So questioning is a fantastic strategy, but know why you're using it and what you want out of it.
Yeah, very good, Akhil. And I think, one of the questions I always used to use when I was running corporates is somebody would come to me and say, boss, we've got a problem. And I'd say, imagine I wasn't here today. What would you do about it?
Absolutely right.
And then they'd tell me and I'd say, what if that wasn't the best way to go about it? What else could you come up with? Then they'd come up with something else and I go, just refine that a bit. And then they'd refine it. I go, that's the exact right answer. Well done. Go and implement that. So that was a way of actually training people to stop plunking everything on you. And many of us run businesses where our staff go, what are we going to do about this? What are we going to do about that? So they're literally asking you to make decisions, which then turns you into an autocratic leader, which may not be necessarily the best style of leadership that you've got. Do we have any final questions for Akhil? Akhil, while people are thinking whether they want to ask a final question or not, Gus put down there, share a created vision. Can you repeat that for us, Mike? Yes, I can. When you ask people, if I wasn't here today, what would you do? And then when they tell you, if you don't like their answer, you think it sucks, you say, okay, well, let's, if that wasn't the right answer, what else could you come up with? That's if it sucks. And if it's half good, you say, okay, and in what ways could you enhance that to get it even better until they get the right answer? Then you're really empowering the staff member, which, and giving them confidence as well, which really helps.
So actually, just adding on to Mike's point, in fact, there's a very effective leadership strategy called absence. So, for example, like very often, when let's say there's a team member has a certain amount of difficulty, as what Mike said, is that very often they just call you for help, and you become sort of like the overall agony aunt or uncle, and you're just sort of helping everything, and everything comes to you. But that gives you absolutely no time for yourself or to do anything else. So what I tend to do sometimes is just be not available. I say, look, I'm actually not going to pick up your phone. I'm not going to answer your email. Sort it out yourself. The flip side of that is making sure that when they do attempt something without your input, and if they mess up, don't chop their heads off. Say, look, you made, and then there's no such thing as a mistake. You're saying you made the best decision based on the information that you had around you. So therefore, you made the right decision, but the environment did not support it. As long as you give them the chance to fail and and learn from that failure, the more absent you are, sometimes makes you a better leader. In fact, that's what I tend to do because I've got these a very large team. I've got around almost 200 people in my organization today, and we're growing very quickly in all directions. Very often, I just step back and say, look, I'm not going to help you out. You sort it out and give me a result. And if you mess up, fine.
Fantastic advice and a great place to leave us with today as well, Akhil. So thank you so much, Akhil. Everybody give Akhil a round of applause. Well done. And Paula, thanks for your comment. Important to create a learning environment as this co-creates versus a speak up versus a shut up culture. And that's definitely what we don't want, is a shut up culture. So I think we've had some great insights today, Akhil. Thank you so much for being on the call. Thanks everybody, and we'll see you next week.
Found it useful. Bye-bye.